Captain Adam, what's the matter?
I don't feel very well.
Did you go to the doctor?
Yeah.
Well, what did he say?
The doctor said I have vertigo.
Wow, that looks like a very early distribution.
Yeah, I found it at a thrift store.
Well, that explains the smell.
Yeah. That's what that is. Say, what did you get into this weekend?
I went and checked out this famous graveyard.
What's so famous about it?
I'm not sure, but everyone's just dying to get in. I don't think they like our opening very much.
Yeah, we better go with the other one. I could be Frankenstein's monster. I could be a pirate, but that would just be stupid. Oh, hey mates. Welcome to the Captain Adams VHS pirate ship. I'm just trying to decide on what I'm going to be for Halloween. It's got to be something scary, something spooktacular.
Did someone say spooktacular?
Oh, hey little creep.
Greetings. What are you up to?
I'm trying to decide on what I'm going to be for Halloween.
That's always a hard decision. I'm going to be a scary doctor.
A doctor?
No, a scary doctor.
That sounds pretty neat. I think I'd like to see that.
Sure thing. Well, what do you think?
It's pretty scary.
Is it spooktacular?
It's pretty spooktacular.
Oh, good. I've always wanted to be a scary doctor. You know, I almost was a real doctor once.
You were? Let me guess. You didn't have the patience.
No, I couldn't afford medical school.
Oh. Well, how about we check out what today's episode is gonna be?
Today's adventure is all about weird horror movie sequels.
Oh boy, this ought to be a good one. Say, do you know what the best part of Exorcist 2 is?
What?
The end credits.
Yeah, that movie sucks, and we're gonna talk about it. That and a whole lot more. Yo ho ho!
Time for the show!
Yar!
Yar!
The sequel. The perfect way to finish or continue a storyline and, of course, make the studio more money. But the general consensus is that usually sequels suck and are never superior to the original movie. The first one was better, but I've found that that's not necessarily always true. In fact, it's usually not true. Now, I'm saying it's usually not true. There are lots of sequels that just simply fucking suck. Fucking suck! And of course, if a movie has a sequel that goes direct to video, well, you know exactly what you're in for. But as I've said before, direct to video does not necessarily mean the movie is bad, but usually, in fact, always, when it's a sequel, it's gonna suck. Fucking sucks. But I'm saying that the blanket way of thinking that all sequels automatically suck is just wrong. Case in point, The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this movie is far superior to A New Hope. You can't honestly tell me that A New Hope is better than Empire Strikes Back. It's just not. And I've gotten into lots of arguments with herds of nerds over this very topic. Nerds that will blindly defend a film franchise that should have ended with Return of the Jedi, and you know it. So anyway, I've found that sequels are sometimes superior to the original film, more so than not. Another great example is Terminator 2. And how about Back to the Future 2? And of course, like I talked about in the last episode, The Bride of Frankenstein. And then of course, there is the Batman Returns conundrum. Something I totally just made up. So you got 1989's Batman with the follow-up film Batman Returns. When Batman Returns was released, and for years after that, everybody just figured it was far better than 1989's Batman. And it's simply because there's just more that happens in Batman Returns. It's more visually pleasing, it's more entertaining, and it's certainly way more Tim Burton-y than the first Batman film is. But this does not necessarily mean it's a good movie. I mean, come on. Penguin Commandos, for fuck's sakes. So once all the magic of Batman Returns eventually wore off, people will have come around to the fact that this movie kind of blows. And the first Batman film is far superior, especially considering that whole film franchise went down the shitter right after Batman Returns. And you could argue that is because of Batman Returns, but I don't got that kind of time. So the Batman Returns conundrum is that people at first thought it was superior, and now they just think it's really fucking wacky. Fucking wacky. And then there's Any Which Way You Can, the sequel to Every Which Way But Loose, and Any Which Way You Can is far superior to Every Which Way But Loose. And I talk about that in a mini-sode, which is in the archives if you wanted to check that out. If not, whatever. There's lots of great examples where sequels just simply aren't as bad as people make them out to be. There's Cannonball Run 2, there's Arthur 2 on the Rocks, there's The Two Jakes, Aliens, Conan the Destroyer, and I'm gonna go ahead and say it, Predator 2 is a great movie. Oh, and by the way, Danny Glover is the only man who's killed a predator. Schwarzenegger did not kill the predator in the first movie. If you recall, the predator killed himself. Though Schwarzenegger did manage to fuck him up pretty good. I know what you're saying. Captain Adam, you're supposed to be talking about horror movies, but you're out here talking about Danny Glover and Cannonball Run 2. I know what you're saying. I get that. And hold on. I'm getting to it. In fact, right now. Of course, sequels exist in every genre of film, but the most prevalent genre of film where sequels thrive is horror movies. The more famous examples would be the Halloween series, Friday the 13th series, and the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But of course, there were other horror movies that had their own sequels, and I've found that the myth that the sequel always sucks usually comes from this genre of film. And today, we're going to take a look at some really bad and some really strange horror movie follow-ups in today's episode, Weird Horror Movie Sequels. 90% of the time, horror movies will always have many sequels and long-running film series. Chances are, if someone makes one horror movie, they're gonna make 1,000 more. Friday the 13th, Part 27, Jason Goes to Hershey Park and Has a Lovely Day. Well, they'll at least get a couple sequels. And sometimes those sequels are good, and sometimes they fucking suck. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're just plain weird. Meaning that they seem like they have nothing to do with the rest of the film series. Which brings us to our first example, and probably the best example of this, with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. But first, let's start at the beginning with the first Halloween movie, which was released in theaters October 25th, 1978. And not only did this movie establish the subgenre of horror movies known as slasher films, it would also introduce the world to the silver screen's newest ghoul, Michael Myers. And this movie was an instant hit. See, it was an independent movie made for a budget of $300,000, and it took in $70 million at the box office. $70 fucking million. $70 fucking million. So yeah, you could say that this movie was a hit. Big old money. So naturally, there was going to be a sequel, and we got one with Halloween 2, which was released in theaters October 30th, 1981. And this was a big hit too, and it no longer was an independent film as it got picked up by Universal Pictures. And they were given a bigger budget of $2.5 million, and the film made $25 million at the box office. People just could not get enough of Michael Myers. So with two big hits on their hands, they decided to keep cranking out Halloween movies, and we got another Halloween sequel with Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch. which was released in theaters October 22nd, 1982. And this is where it gets sort of weird, because it's a sequel that has absolutely nothing to do with the other two movies. There's no Michael Myers, and there's no congruity with anything. Imagine, if you will, driving to the theater all psyched up to go see another Michael Myers flick, and then you see this. Geez, you would almost think you went into the wrong theater. It would be like if you went to go see Jurassic Park 3 and instead it was just Cadillac Man. Oh, and by the way, Jurassic Park 3 sucks. Fucking sucks! So what's the deal here? Well, the original intention of the Halloween movies was to be a non-linear film series, comprised of movies that each had different stories and different characters, and each would showcase something horrible that happened on Halloween. And this might have worked had it not been for Halloween 2. Because when you make a sequel that has the same character in it, well, you're establishing that character to that film series. No shit! And people are going to expect that character to be in the next movie. And it's not a bad movie, it's a pretty good horror movie. It should have just been called Season of the Witch and not been associated with the rest of the Halloween movies. But when you call your movie Halloween 3, people are going to assume it's the third installment of the Halloween series, mainly because that's what the movie is fucking called. And they're going to be very disappointed to find out it has nothing to do with the other two films. And they were, and whatever the writer's intentions were, people just did not give a shit, and the box office numbers reflected that. This did poorly. And it took the Halloween franchise a little while to recover from this. Halloween 4 was released 6 years later, October 24th, 1988 to be exact, and they gave the movie the subtitle, The Return of Michael Myers, just to be sure that everyone knew what this movie was about. Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, has since gained cult acclaim and was released on VHS in 1983 by MCA Home Video, and then again in 1987, once again by MCA Home Video. And it was released in 1996 by Good Times Home Video. And it was also part of a Blockbuster Video exclusive Halloween Trilogy box set. And this box set also includes the Blockbuster exclusive distribution of the first Halloween movie. And Blockbuster Video also released a Blockbuster Video exclusive of some Three Stooges episodes. And I have this, and I'm very happy about it. Hey, what's the big idea? You're supposed to be talking about horror movies, Puddinhead. Come here, you. Oh, I oughta... Oh, excuse me. So anyways, every distribution of Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, seems to go for around 30 buckaroonies nowadays. And the Blockbuster box set seems to be pretty easy to find, but you're going to pay 50 buckaroonies. Halloween 3 is weird, simply because it doesn't fit in any of the other Halloween movies. And weird is usually a neutral term, meaning neither bad nor good. But sometimes weird does mean bad, which begs the question, how do you take one of the best horror movies of all time and ruin it? And of course, I'm talking about The Exorcist.
The Exorcist.
Yes, The Exorcist. A pleasant little story about a little girl who gets possessed by a demon. It was released in theaters December 26, 1973, and is regarded as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It was made with a budget of $12 million and took in $441 million at the box office. So this movie got a lot of people's attention and money. And at the time, it was a very unique horror movie. This movie wasn't about a haunted house or some big scary monster chasing you around. No, this movie was about a child who gets possessed by a demon. So this movie got a lot of heat, and there was no shortage of controversy. And if you've seen the movie, then you know that there's really not any way to squeeze a sequel out of it. It's just not that kind of movie, and nobody wanted a sequel, but we got one anyway with Exorcist 2, The Heretic. To the dismay of everyone and at the behest of absolutely no one, this was released in theaters June 17th, 1977. And though it did well at the box office, this was a critical failure, and everyone hated it.
Fucking hated it.
In fact, at one of the movie's premieres, audience members got so angry at this film that they actually chased Warner Brothers executives down the street. I mean, I've seen bad movies before, but this one is so bad it just pisses you off. Nobody wanted a sequel to The Exorcist. It doesn't need a sequel. Everybody was okay with having just one Exorcist movie. And the movie has since been deemed one of the worst films of all time. I mean, on its face, it seems okay. And you got the poster, okay, Exorcist 2, The Heretic, all right. Wendell Blair's in it, okay. Everything's okay so far. And then you watch the movie and it quickly cascades into a fever dream. The director of the first Exorcist film called this movie the worst piece of crap he's ever seen, and that it was a horrible sequel that diminished the value of the original film. Yeah, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that actually likes this movie. And James Earl Jones is in this, and I think everybody forgets about that, and I'm sure he would like to as well. And I just have a feeling that if you were ever to meet James Earl Jones and ask him about this movie, he would probably hit you with a chair. James Earl Jones is terrific in everything he's in, but even he couldn't pull the nose up on this movie. When people make the assumption that sequels suck, I'm pretty sure they're thinking about Exorcist 2. This movie fucking sucks. Fucking sucks! But despite the fact that everybody hates this movie and nobody asked for it, it was still released on VHS in 1980 by Warner Brothers Home Video. And this is in their famous Warner Brothers clamshell. Also, it was released in 1988 and again in 1993. So there's 3 different distributions of this movie. What the fuck? Why? Regardless of my personal opinion, it's still true. And the 1980 distribution is very hard to find nowadays. So, in spite of the fact that nobody likes this movie, it's still a very sought-after VHS tape. Makes no sense. VHS collectors are so weird, and I gotta have this. But the 1988 and the 1993 distributions are easy to find, and they're relatively cheap. Shit, they should be free. They should pay me to take them. So, how does one recover from such a shitstorm of a movie? Well, you'd think the smart thing to do would be just forget about it, hope that time is kind to you, and for God's sakes, don't make another sequel. Or you can do the exact opposite, which is totally what they did with Exorcist 3. This was released in theaters August 17th, 1990. And against all odds, this actually paid off. This is nowhere near as shitty as Exorcist 2. Even though it sort of feels like a made-for-TV movie, it's still pretty good. Certainly underrated, and there's plenty of creepy shit.
Creepy shit.
Creepy shit.
Creepy shit.
This one has a lot to do with the first movie, and thankfully nothing to do with the second one. In fact, this should have been Exorcist 2, and Exorcist 2 should not have even been made. But since it was, it should have been called Exorcist 2, the horribly written movie with Locust and James Earl Jones acts really weird. And Exorcist 3 should have been called Exorcist 3. This is actually Exorcist 2. Exorcist 3 was released on VHS by CBS Fox Home Video in 1991, and that's it. It only has this one VHS distribution. And you know what really burns my cookies? Is the fact that Exorcist 3 is actually a decent movie, but only has one VHS. But the piece of shit that is Exorcist 2 has 3 different distributions. Hey, it doesn't matter what kind of box it's in. If you put dog shit in a box, it's still dog shit in a box. So The Exorcist is a prime example of a horror movie not needing a sequel. But how about a horror movie that's totally welcoming to a sequel? But not just a sequel, a weird sequel. And in this case, weird means good. Which brings me to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which of course is the sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and if you didn't put that together, go ahead and turn this show off and jump off a cliff. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was released in theaters October 11th, 1974. It was a huge hit and proceeded to scare the shit out of everyone. This is certainly on the short list of greatest horror movies of all time. And if you've seen the movie, then you know that the ending sort of leaves the door open for a sequel. And there would be a sequel with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which wouldn't be released till over a decade later. It was released in theaters August 11th, 1986, and it really wasn't what anybody was expecting. And I say it's a weird horror movie sequel because it goes in a totally different direction than the first film. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is more of a dark comedy than it is a horror movie, which is in stark contrast to the first movie, which has
No comedy whatsoever.
Yeah, the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a straight-up horror movie that did a masterful job of making you feel uneasy and scared through the entire film, where the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is actually sort of delightful, which I know it's an incredibly weird thing to say, but it's true. Now, I'm not saying that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is a family movie. It's still a horror movie, and it has its fair share of blood and gore. It's just very interesting that they decided to go this direction with a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, this is certainly a movie that did not take itself too seriously. Even the poster is funny. I mean, look at that. It's a parody of The Breakfast Club. It's just a fun movie. And though it is a weird sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's got lots of good stuff in it. It's got great characters like Chop Top, Lick My Plate, and of course Leatherface, who seems to be sort of more lovable this time around. And Dennis Hopper's in it, and he challenges Leatherface to not a sword fight, but a chainsaw fight. A concept we would see again in the 2018 instant cult classic Mandy, which I wonder if that scene was an homage to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. That's probably something I can find out very easily, but I'm not going to. And if you have not seen Mandy, I highly recommend you do so. This movie is insane. It's a great movie to watch with the kids. No, I'm just kidding. Do not do that. But anyway, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 was nowhere nearly as successful as the first movie, but it still did pretty well at the box office. Its real fame came when it was released on home video by Media in 1986. It would be released again in 1989 by Video Treasures, and it would be released one more time in 1998 by MGM Home Video as part of their MGM Movie Time collection. And the value of any of these distributions today seems to be all over the place, though they average on the high side, but you can find one for around $12. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is a weird horror movie sequel simply because they took it in a different direction. And it's not the only horror movie franchise to do this. So let's take a look at another horror movie franchise that went in a different direction than its previous films and proves once again that weird can sometimes mean good. And a tremendous example of this is The Army of Darkness, the third installment to the Evil Dead films. The first Evil Dead was released in 1981 and went on to be one of, if not the most successful independent films of all time. At first, it did have a limited release, but gained rave reviews from everybody, including Stephen King, which would be the last time he had a viable opinion about anything. The Evil Dead was written and directed by Sam Raimi, who now is a famous director, but back then was a fucking nobody. Fucking nobody. As The Evil Dead gained cult acclaim and worldwide praise, a sequel was only natural, and we got one in 1987 with The Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. The Evil Dead 1 and 2 are both straight-up horror movies, very suspenseful, very spooky, and, well, The Evil Dead 2 is one of my favorite films. And I know I'm being sort of biased here, but The Evil Dead 2 is a tremendous example of the sequel being far superior to the original film. Since The Evil Dead 1 and 2 were so successful, we would be treated to a third installment in 1992 with
The Army of Darkness.
It picks up right where Evil Dead 2 left off, and it's not exactly what people were expecting when it came to a third Evil Dead movie. You see, by this time, the Evil Dead films were well known for being non-stop creep fest, and when people got an action-adventure for the third installment of the Evil Dead movies, well, it took a lot of people by surprise. And that's what it is. It's an action-adventure movie. Though it does have some horror elements to it, it plays out like an action movie. And surprisingly enough, it's actually more of a sword and sorcery movie. And though Army of Darkness really wasn't what anyone was expecting, it still did rather well at the box office. And I say it's a weird horror movie sequel because, well, it's an entirely different genre of film. It's a very fun movie, and I actually saw this before I saw the other Evil Dead movies. That reminds me, one time when I was a kid, my dad had asked me what I wanted to rent from the video store, and I said, Army of Darkness. Well, he misheard me, and to which he exclaimed, Army of Doctors? It was pretty funny. Well, I guess you had to be there. Well, anyways, Army of Darkness would be released on VHS in 1993 by MCA Home Video, and again in 1999 by Anchor Bay. And the 1993 distribution is pretty common, and you could probably find it in a thrift store. That's where I found mine, and you can find it on the internet for around $5, but that doesn't stop people from trying to sell it as if it were the fucking treasure of the Sierra Madre. But, oh well. And you know, I'm pretty glad that they decided to go a different route with Army of Darkness and make it more of an action-packed sword and sorcery movie as opposed to a straight-up horror movie. It breaks the film series up. It makes it different, because if you don't do something like that, you stretch it too far and end up getting movies like Jason Takes Manhattan or Leprechaun Back to the Hood. And if you've seen Jason Takes Manhattan, then you know that that title is very misleading. And there's really only a small portion of the film that takes place in Manhattan. Most of the movie takes place on a ship, so that's weird. I mean, they should have just called it something wacky like Jason Goes Overboard. And the reason why most of the movie takes place on a ship and only a small portion of it takes place in New York, because filming in New York is really fucking expensive. Yeah, you're gonna need permits and shit, and the government's gotta get their take. And this was the 80s, so this was before de Blasio. I can only imagine what it is now. Fucking clown show. Horror movie sequels are everywhere, and it seems like every horror movie franchise has sequels, like Jaws. Yep, the movie where everybody who watched it saw the fucking shark explode at the end of the movie, and yet there's 3 other sequels. Okay. And of course, Jaws is a classic film. It was released in 1975, put Steven Spielberg on the map, and made everyone afraid of sharks. And you know what?
You fucking should be.
Much like The Exorcist, Jaws did not need a sequel, but we got 3 Jaws sequels anyway, and nobody asked for them. And speaking of sequels that nobody asked for, we have Pet Sematary 2. And it's another stupid-ass sequel where they try to just crowbar shit into the storyline, and nobody liked it. I mean, did you think people would? This movie is terrible. Pet Sematary didn't need a sequel? What the fuck are you doing? And then we have Piranha 2, The Spawning, which is the sequel to the 1978 movie Piranha, which is about, it's about piranhas. And Piranha 2, The Spawning, was released in 1982. What makes this a weird horror movie sequel is the fact that the piranhas can now fucking fly. And this was released on VHS in 1989 by Embassy Home Entertainment. This is relatively easy to find today and usually goes for around $15. It's just one of those tapes you gotta have for your collection. So what do you do when you're out of ideas for your horror movie franchise? Well, one thing you can do is just stop making the movies, or you can put it in fucking outer space, which had happened to a few horror movies. Hellraiser, Critters, even Jason ended up in outer space. And so did the Leprechaun, but who gives a shit about that? And the creepy as hell Children of the Corn would have a sequel. And this one isn't too bad, but then it would proceed to have 6 other sequels that were direct to video. And you know what that means. Fucking sucks! And the Tremors film series would suffer the same fate of having direct-to-video sequels. Okay, Tremors is a good movie, but it does not need a sequel. Certainly not 5 of them. There is a few old sayings that come to mind when I think of sequels. One is going to the well one too many times, and the other, is butter scraped over too much bread. But sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And with horror movie sequels, there's the good, the bad, and the just plain weird. And so, that's that. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. And be sure to hit subscribe and give a like and hit that notification bell so you'll know when I upload more shit. I hope your October is spooktacular.
Spooktacular.
Happy Halloween, everybody. See you next time, mateys. Only on Captain Adam's VHS pirate ship.